Good morning, everyone. I am Mark Field, and it gives me great pleasure to be hosting today's webinar on behalf of Auto Resource, brought to you by Automechanika. On behalf of us all, welcome. This session is the fourth in the series of webinars to be delivered by the team for the UK's automotive aftermarket since June last year. Today's discussion will look at the impact of the pandemic on workshop training, what the new normal will be for training beyond the pandemic, and what the training priorities are moving forward. We'd like to thank Bosch and Alliance Automotive Group for supporting this session. A recording of the webinar will be available on Auto Resource to watch later at your convenience. But before I introduce our guests, I do need to cover some brief housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded. If you have technical difficulties accessing the webinar, please go to the best browsers to use are Google, Chrome or Firefox. There is also technical support available at support.goto.com/webinar. This session will take 45 minutes where we'll have discussions, then we'll move into questions and we'll come back to some of the discussions as well at the end. And we'll also have some polls as well after a number of questions. Today, we are delighted to be joined by automotive author Tom Denton, Bosch UK Ireland Sales Director Kevin Kelly, Technical Director at Technical Topics James Dillon, AutoCare Garage Network Manager Maria McCullough, and Network Manager for United Garage Services Phil Weller. Welcome, everyone. Each of our panel will share their experiences from their positions in the industry and with the knowledge of the many companies they represent. So if we're all ready, let's kick off. So our first question or our first topic will be to go straight in and look at the impact that COVID-19 has had on training. And Maria, if I can come to you first, how has the training you traditionally offer been affected by COVID?
Not as dramatic as we anticipated in the first lockdown last year, although we did see an impact on the training from sort of first lockdown April, May time, but we were very lucky in that we did restart the classroom and the workshop training from July onwards, and we were able to run that right up until December. Obviously, the main impact of when we did restart was the reduced numbers, obviously providing the social distancing and obviously providing all the PPE equipment as well. So it did have an impact in terms of the demand was very much still there from the garages, but obviously we were had to be very careful, and in some cases the number of courses that we ran was actually reduced by 50% capacity. So it was challenging, and obviously we couldn't accommodate as many people as we would normally be able to do on the training for sort of last year. And then obviously this year didn't start off too well either with January and February lockdown, but we have started again in March, and obviously we have got our calendar pretty much booking up very quickly up until the end of sort of December. So we're fairly optimistic that we're hoping that it'll kickstart again, and like I say, every course that we've run so far in March is actually full. So it's all very positive, but obviously had an impact on us, but maybe not quite as much as we anticipated.
Okay, well, it's fantastic that things are looking up for for March onwards. And James, if I can bring you in now, we often go back before we look forward, but just in that past year, what have you done? What's been your focus? How have you adopted your training?
Yeah, so interestingly, that obviously the training stopped in the lockdown as we were generally attract people from all over the country. So in that case, our business ceased to deliver face-to-face training during the lockdown, but we managed to keep contact with our training customers and garages generally through social media and platforms such as webinars and short sessions to sort of keep the training topped up. So yeah, in terms of adapting, online really was the shift to keep people's sort of focus on learning with short sessions. Obviously, some of the courses that we do traditionally are quite long, but the medium of the internet generally leads to short and taster versions then of the full training. So that's how we maintained contact with our clients and kept them in the phase or mode of learning.
And Kevin, with as James said, that emergence of these new training methods, how effective do you think they've been in the past year?
Yeah, I think they've been very effective, especially in the area that James described of training teasers and get people re-engaging with the thought of education and training courses again. And I think the wider impact of COVID, very similar to what Maria and James said, we obviously had to shut the training centres, just like other academic institutions of schools and colleges. Prior to that, we had a fantastic, utilisation and fill rate. We'd actually achieved 100% fill rate in the March of 2020. Then, of course, shutdown affected us all. And we took a slightly different approach. A number of reasons. One was customer driven. We had a number of contracts where even during lockdown, customers had identified that they had a shortage of skilled technicians, especially in the area of hybrid. So we had to quickly adapt to that request. Clearly, we didn't have the training centre available to us. So we took the decision to completely rewrite the course and deliver it distance learning. And I think what the positive impact of COVID has been, not only to delegates and to customers about the potential benefits of distance learning, digital training, but I think also the trainers themselves. I think trainers have always enjoyed the physical element of standing in front of a group, seeing the body language, making an intervention where somebody's struggling, whether it be in the practical element or the academic element. So I think our first sales job was to the training team to say, look, this can work. These are the subtleties of delivering distance learning or webinars or online, but I think that's been a big success. I think there's clearly been some negative impacts in terms of training centres and physical capacity, but actually I think it's forced trainers to embrace the new world, and we're seeing a big positive response from that from customers.
And I think it's clear from what we've said so far is that the demand hasn't gone away, has it? The demand is always there. And I guess, Tom, from your side, it's how you shape your content to meet that demand and the different platforms that needs to be on.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, I completely agree with what our other speakers have said so far. And just to find another small positive in what's happened, I mean, book sales have actually gone up a little bit this year, so that's always nice to find out, isn't it? But one of the reasons for that, I think, looking for almost a bigger positive, is that it started the debate about training. People are perhaps more involved in thinking about training just because they couldn't go and there were other options, and what are we going to do and how is it going to work? The very fact that we're sat here now talking about training has got to be a good thing, because we want to encourage more people to take part. So in a strange way, while we've had to cut down, and I know some small training companies have had an awful time managing to keep up, financially and everything over the last year. Perhaps a good thing that will come out of it is that it's bringing training in general higher up the agenda.
Do you think we've missed training, James?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think the feedback that we've had from people, Mark, that haven't been able to come for training, whilst the medium of the internet to deliver content, as Kevin alluded to, really, there's so much in terms of non-verbal communication that goes on during face-to-face training, and particularly with our trade being a hands-on trade, it's sometimes quite tricky to get the detailed content across to participants when you're showing them on a webcam. Even we had multicam websites set up in the workshop and close in on some detailed electronics that we're doing, but still purveying the detail of the information is quite difficult. And surprisingly, one of the other mediums would be the communication lag. So we've probably all been on to webinars and seminars where in a face-to-face room where you ask a question and are seeking to confirm understanding or seek if there are any knowledge gaps, actually getting the feedback is quite difficult in a group of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50. It becomes quite stuttered, and the dynamics of the communication, it's a big challenge with online.
Mark, if I may, there's one area where we have seen a very negative impact, and that's with our apprenticeship training. We were able to keep going during the first part of lockdown with some distance courses and keeping the academic underpinning going for the delegates and the young people. But as everybody knows, apprenticeships, you need that practical application of the knowledge to keep it fresh and ensure you gain the evidence for the NVQ. So when we came into the second lockdown, we really struggled to effectively have the content to deliver, because the individuals were not gaining the experience that they would normally get in the workshop. as many of them were on furlough, especially some of the OE customers had obviously closed down to essential services only. So we actually had to have a physical break in learning, which means we receive no funding. The learners are not getting development support or educational support. So I think there's been many positives as the team have just described, but I think we've got to be very mindful that apprenticeships has taken a bit of a hit during lockdown, and we're going to all have to work quite hard to get the learners back on track, and certainly in terms of on-time qualifications into 21 and beyond.
No,
Mark,
it's a good point.
Mark, sorry, just to add, just regarding online training, I think it's also worth adding that it's been difficult to gauge how popular and how useful that can be, because we've had some, the garage trade, barring the earlier months of lockdown last year, have been exceptionally busy, a lot of them, a lot of the independents, and along with probably at some time being short-staffed during that period. So it's having the time. I think that obviously, Kevin, the online sort of light bites at Bosch, a lot have been focusing around lunch breaks and running around sort of 12-hour ones to try and capture. So it's obvious that would be, you would think that'd be something that would work, and we offered some online webinars throughout that period, and the initial months, sort of April, May last year, when some people were at home, some people had closed again, we had more people logging on, but once the garages reopened, they were that busy. It was hard to judge how successful or effective online training could be, because I think people were just too busy to attend it.
I think you've made some great points, and I think that we've shown ourselves at our resilient best as a trade. But as you said, Kevin, there have been some big difficulties along the way that we are playing catch up in certain areas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And with that in mind, what we want to do now is just move on to a quick poll, if we can. And what we'll do is we'll ask the audience on a question about how equipped they believe their workforce is with the skills and training for your business to be successful in the next 5 years. So once again, how equipped do you believe your workforce is with the skills and training for your business in order to be successful in the next 5 years? And the results are just coming in. And I think what we'll then move to now is some of our training priorities for the automotive supply chain. And against the backdrop of that, if we just look at the poll, so again, we asked the question, how equipped our audience is to make sure that their business is ready for the next 5 years, then the majority of people were around about sort of 50%, and we had a much smaller number, probably about 10%, that were 100% confident. So it kind of just says that whilst we have done all these things and we've been very proactive and resilient, Kevin, we have a long way to go, don't we, in terms of our training journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, resilience was a word you used, Mark, which I think certainly described the automotive aftermarket in every crisis we've been through. I think there's some other comment. I think Tom mentioned it. What I think has re-sparked is people's interest in education and career development. I think that's made it, very, purely from an employability perspective, as times get hard, you want to make yourself as employable and as useful and as productive as possible. So clearly training and development is an opportunity there. So I think for us, the digital area, not only can we deliver education and qualifications, not just light bites and sound bite training, we can actually deliver full qualifications. But hopefully the ease of access for digital training will get people reinvigorated towards education. So that's a key area of our strategy moving forward. And when it comes to technology, we can trot out the technologies of electrification, hybrid, etc. But my current high focus is on the areas of ADAS and essential electrical skills. So ADAS, because of the number of vehicles coming into the workshops, that is absolutely an area that the independent garages have to get fully engaged with and understand how they're going to handle that. But also that, as electrification continues, it's the core skills of electrical systems that people are going to, is the foundation. So mixture of getting people engaged again with light bikes, but then there's a couple of key topics moving through there.
Yeah, and Tom, is it the new legislation that is the driving force behind this training?
Well, there's definitely a huge push now, isn't there, towards electric and hybrid with our 2030 legislation coming along. We can debate another time whether that's a good thing or not, but it's actually happening, and it's going to require people to be trained to work on high voltage systems. ADAS, of course, is important, as Kevin was saying, and there is some legislation attached to that, which I think Kevin or James will be better to talk about in a few minutes. But as far as high voltage is concerned, of course, there are always a number of reasons for doing training on these sort of things. I mean, first of all, do the training so you know how to do the work properly, so you're able to diagnose the faults properly, so you're able to earn money for the business you're working for. That's the fundamental reason for learning how to to do something or to do something better. However, the high voltage context does change things ever so slightly, because there is existing legislation that relates to the Electricity at Work Act. And the Electricity at Work Act, in very simple terms, as you could imagine, it goes on a little more than this, but in very simple terms, it says that any person working on high voltage systems must be appropriately trained or supervised, or all of these sort of things. And the case is, in a lot of workshops, people are not yet trained for high voltage systems. So there's a potential not only of risk of injury and death, but damage to vehicles and damage to other things as well that might happen. And being trained in high voltage, and again, James and the other guys and Kevin will be able to comment on the actual training a little bit more. But it's usually with an existing skilled technician, only a couple of days or a week at the very most, to bring people's skills levels up considerably. We're left with the thorny problem sometimes of when you've done training. I've done some training courses 20 years ago. Arguably, they're not worth anything anymore, are they? Because I've forgotten everything in between. So how do we prove that we've kept up to date with training and things like that, which is a requirement of the Electricity at Work Act? And on behalf of the IMI, I can sort of comment that we've been working very hard in this area on a scheme that we've called TechSafe. It keeps technicians safe, but it also means that safe repairs are done properly, whereby as part of a professional register, people have to complete a qualification, which they'll carry out with James or Kevin or some of the other guys on the call here, but then keep up to date by carrying out specified CPD, continuing professional development, which is another aspect of ongoing training, isn't it? It might be something we come back to later, but certainly an important aspect to not only do the qualifications and get yourself safe and competent, but then maintain that competency. I always imagine I'm stood in front of the judge in a court. So Mr. Denton, when you electrocuted your apprentice, how can you prove that you were competent to be doing that work? And well, my lord, I did a course 8 years ago. It doesn't work. We need to be able to show that we're keeping up to date with things. So I think continuing development is as important as the learning in the first place.
And Phil, from your point of view, for someone that works with obviously motor factors, and let's not forget, the important role they play in the provision of training, but also training itself, and also garages. There is a lot of content to access. There's a lot of training. So, where is the demand right now down at garage level in terms of the training you provide?
Well, I mean, we run over 70 different courses. Obviously, particularly due to the 2030 legislation, EV and hybrid are more popular than ever. We were kind of at the forefront of that. The networks that Maria and I run, we had sort of close to 300 technicians qualified to level 3. But what you're finding now is garages taking more notice. They want all their technicians qualified to level 3. So the demand there is definitely peaking on EV and hybrid. We have launched, we've launched ADAS. I know that's our latest course that we've added to our list. And we do still fill all of our other, whether it be, essential, advanced electrics, all the other courses, but the popular ones at the moment, it's certainly the EV. GV.
And James, from your side, is it a case of obviously dictating the priorities, or does the garage do that themselves really in terms of what they're attending?
Yeah, it's really interesting. That one thing that always springs to my mind is when you see garages advertising their proposition to the end users, we often hear the term fully trained technicians in a fully equipped workshop. And there is no such thing, because as much as you're trained to the competent level, as Tom was saying, 8 years ago, at whatever stage you're at, be that your level 3 when you left college, or the course that you did most recently, nobody in reality is ever fully trained, and myself included. So the continuing professional development is critical. Dealing, I suppose, managing the content that technology faces the garages with, there's a couple of reasons really in terms of what dictates where technicians are looking for training, and also business owners, because we've probably got to be focusing on who's actually driving the training need within the business, and for the technician it may be a business owner. And we tend to find that they're either coming from problems that were in the workshop that they couldn't complete correctly, flag an issue that is now need to be solved with training. We see that quite a lot. So an EV may have come in that it couldn't be worked on because they didn't have qualifications, and they flagged that as a need. They don't want that to happen again. ADAS falls into a similar category, that more and more cars are coming in for non-ADAS related work, chassis, suspension, steering adjustments that then require the calibration to be completed afterwards. And there is an angle from insurance company recommendations that the calibrator is competent. And again, that legislation is driving the demand on a little bit, that garages are being pulled along a bit. It's the same with the EV and the electricity at work. To be compliant, we have to have training. But we also see a big demand driven by failures to complete jobs satisfactorily or profitably. So traditionally we run an EV, a diagnostic boot camp, which is for improvers, and generally people that come on that course have had several problem jobs in a row that they want not to have to happen again, and that could be a skills or knowledge gap that they're specifically aiming to address by having that training. So yeah, the need is either business driven or problem within the business or legislation that we find.
Yeah, I think James, just to support that, the two elements there. So it's either a formal qualification they're working towards. That's a big driver for training, whether it's an accreditation or a qualification. Then there's the silver bullet approach that James described. The jobs come in that they couldn't do first time or not effectively or profitably. I think the way that the question that addresses to all of us on this panel is what's the priority. I think it's the third element. It's what's the business strategy and what's the training plan that goes with that business strategy. That's where I'd like to drive our workshop customers from all different segments, is look at training as a fundamental part of your business strategy, and then plan accordingly, because it's an investment in that business strategy. It's not just a cost.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If I may, one of the drivers, obviously, for we hear, and going back to Kevin's point about apprenticeships, really, and starting to grip the thorny issue of the lack of skills within the industry. If you talk to any garages looking for technicians, the recruitment process is very strained, trying to find a technician to fill a gap. The garages have work, but they don't have workers necessarily. And we're seeing more and more, one of our popular programs is the diagnostic technician and the master technician, which ends up with an accreditation. And we're seeing an increasing number of garages using that as a motivational tool for recruitment and retention within the business, to ensure that they've got a motivated workforce in place, but also that they can attract new talent, because talent looking for opportunities, it's not quite so much about the money or the conditions necessarily, but it's about that continuing professional development, as technicians in the workshop see themselves not wanting to be left behind by going to work somewhere that doesn't offer training. And that's becoming definitely a selection criteria for technicians.
And this is something, Maria, Kevin has kind of alluded to this, but technical training, business training is very much equally important in terms of that what all of us need, in terms of being competent, not just within the vehicles that we work on, but also as a business that we're actually running as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's actually been a massive change for us. We've been obviously running the training for sort of 18 years now, and predominantly, maybe 10 years ago, we offered business training as part of the membership, as well as technical, and it was very poor take up on the business training side of things. That's changed completely in the last 2.5 years now. The business courses that we do run, we use Andy Sava, and the business courses that we do run there is a lot more attendance, a lot better attendance, and the feedback is also excellent as well. So compared to business training and technical training, we've still got a very good balance there, but certainly business training has increased. The attendees on business training has increased significantly.
So as we move on to this next area, which is how have attitudes towards training changed, Kevin, if I go back to the poll, where if I just run the numbers, we've probably got 80% that are more confident in terms of that they're equipped to deal with challenges, or their business is equipped to deal with the future. That does show a bit of a change, doesn't it, in terms of training? And whilst we can say that the lockdown or COVID-19 has been restrictive in terms of the provision of training, we haven't stopped learning.
Yeah, which again I think we all touched on earlier is one of the positives out of a very difficult period of our history, that I think people have had more time to take a little step back and consider life choices, work choices, business choices, and doing more research. We've seen that in countless studies and market reports, that people are considering their purchasing more often. Which customers which companies do they use? What's that company's strategy? So we've seen, I think, a change in approach to many things in life, and training is no different. And I think the digitization and the light bites and all the things that people on this panel are doing, and many others, to get people re-engaged with the thought of education is really positive. But I think training for training's sake is pointless. It's a waste of everybody's time and effort. So I'll go back to what is the business strategy of these individuals and of these companies, and where does training work inside there? So there's what type of vehicles do they want to be working on? What type of jobs do they want to specialize on and advertise on? So I think that's hopefully improving. We've seen a very similar uptick in business and management skills training that Maria referred to. So really it's the combination of all of those elements. It's people getting curious about education again. Maybe the new platforms are a bit sexier and they're getting people re-engaged, which is a positive, but it has to be fundamentally linked to where is my business going and where am I going as an individual, and success has to be planned, and training's part of that.
And part of that career development path, as you kind of allude to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly what Tom said. So you've got to keep yourself employable for your career. And whilst people say yes, they're 80% clear on what they need for the future, we don't know what we don't know. Hybrid and fuel cells are taking over now. I know that hydrogen is going to be a big part of the future of vehicle power. Are people ready for hydrogen cells? So we don't know what we don't know about this ever-changing industry. And so I think it's having that curiosity and that commitment to lifelong learning, which hopefully is an attitude I've seen change in the last 12 months.
Okay, I was hoping Tom was going to answer that hydrogen fuel question, but I'll move on. James.
Mark, can I just jump in anyway?
Of course.
I mean, I don't think I'll risk answering the hydrogen fuel question too deeply. Well, go on then, just a little bit. I mean, my view is that hydrogen will potentially be of much greater use on the heavier vehicles, so that I think most cars will probably be pure electric, but as you move towards heavier vehicles and public transport and things, is probably where the hydrogen will go. But I completely agree with Kevin. We don't really know yet. We're still in a period of change. I mean, the one thing I wanted to add, I completely agree with what Kevin has just said, but one of the things I think I've noticed about the trade in general, if you like, is that the garage owners and so on, independents, are starting to think about what segment of market they want to aim at. There are some small garages out there who will like hoover up any kind of work that needs doing, fitting old parts and second-hand parts and things. But there are others now who are starting to think, well, actually, you know, if we're investing in all this high quality, expensive equipment, and we're investing in training and we're investing in people, then there's a need to look at what segment of market we're aiming at in order to be able to recuperate the costs of what we do. And perhaps as we move towards more complex, well, arguably simpler in some ways, but more complex diagnostics and things on, you know, more ADAS and more connectivity and more automated driving and high voltage and hydrogen and so on, perhaps this is something that garages will do. They'll find the need to specialise and also aim at a particular market segment.
And that's an interesting point, that there is such a wholesome approach now, and perhaps lots of content available, but also looking at how garages or any business could be specific in certain areas. James, are there perceived obstacles or barriers that still exist that we have to overcome? Have they changed in the last year?
I think we've just lost James for a minute.
I think we've lost James. So actually, I'm going to direct that question to Maria, if that's okay. Maria, in terms of the perceived obstacles, and I know that, you know, yourself and Phil and Kevin and Tom will probably all have these examples where we've had barriers to training. Have they changed in the past year, or is it something that you've been easily overcome because we've got more online? But is it this blended approach that works a lot better?
Well, personally, we, as Phil touched on earlier, Mark, we don't really offer online as a sort of ongoing sort of course content. Ours are mainly classroom and workshop, and that's just predominantly the way that we've always done it. We have done some online ones during lockdown just to support the network, but they were more sort of bite-sized. But I still think ongoing, and certainly the feedback that we get from our garage network is that basically the classroom and the workshop ones are the ones that they would still prefer. I think there's, in terms of online, I think there's a place for it, but I think there's also quite a lot of distractions with online. So whilst ours were successful to an extent, ours certainly started to tail off, like Phil said, when the garages were busier. And I suppose the danger of an online one is that if you're in the garage and it is busy, you do tend to get sort of dragged away, really. Whereas a classroom and a workshop course, you're actually away from the business completely, and you can focus 100% on that particular course.
And Tom, as you have said, in terms of this kind of the specialist approach, but do you still come across the barriers of cost and investment, or cost versus investment?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that far too many people still see training as a cost, whereas I think we would preach all the time that no, it's not, it's an investment. I mean, yes, you've got to hand over the money at the time that you're doing the training, but in the longer term, people can diagnose faults more quickly, you can take on better work, increase, upsell, increase sales, and so on. So, once you kind of do the numbers, as it were, good quality training is definitely an investment. I mean, kind of touching with that subject, it's been interesting, really, because as we've all, tried to struggle to put a little bit of online training on where we would have been doing face-to-face and things like that, is this perceived value of different sorts of training. I mean, Maria was spot on when she said that, you go in the corner of your workshop to do some online training, and if the workshop gets busy, you're off, aren't you? You're dragged out of it, and I'll finish it later and things like that. And it's not the same as as really engaging in it in that way. So I think people have still got to learn how to really partake in online training. So I don't think it'll ever completely replace face-to-face. There's an option for some kind of blended approach, isn't there? I mean, the sort of examples I always like to think about are not necessarily that you do half the work before you get there, but Kevin alluded to it earlier on. We still struggle in our trade. We take people in on a level 3 electric vehicle course, for example, and find ourselves having to sort of catch up on Ohm's law and some basic electrical kind of knowledge and things like that. So perhaps the place where online learning will really start to benefit is that we can help people cover the revision, let's call it, or the prerequisites before they attend the course, and then the time that they spend, actually on a course with Kevin and then James and the other guys as well, is more beneficial to everybody. So maybe it's that kind of approach that will work better.
Tom, that's a great point. That's a great point, Tom. And we've absolutely seen that. I think what we've proven now is we can deliver a full qualification. We did it during lockdown, 109 delegates through to hybrid level 3, all online with a half-day assessment at the end. So, you can't hit a nail with the internet. So you still need the practical bits. You still need to do that. But I think the digitization, the distance learning, the guided learning, as you've described, online examination, can make that physical presence in the training centre much more focused and much more powerful. So I agree with you. I think the blended training, which is a bit of a buzzword that I'm sure Mark came up with, or somebody in the communications world, but it is definitely, I call it topping and tailing. It's before you get to the training course, what do you need to do? Then after the training course, to keep it live and keep it, just a little bit of touch points after that. That's where the digital world can really add value, as well as deliver a full qualification. It can do all of those things depending on what the customer wants. And
I think if I can jump back in,
of course,
we also do need to work on this perceived value of training, don't we? And that perhaps it's our job to get the message over that running an online course, as people that are doing training, if you like, is just as expensive, just as time consuming as running a face-to-face course. And I think that's perhaps a message we need to try to work on, that people think that, once something's online or it's on an app, it should be £1.50 for the app or something. And the training courses that I know Kevin has built, and I know James has and other people have as well, there's an enormous amount of work has gone into the background of those, and there's also an enormous amount of work supporting them. I know behind them you still have a tutor or a teacher, instructor, whatever words we want to use, like supporting people through it. And that's what makes it into a high quality training experience, rather than just going, click, 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 working through something online without any support. So I think that's
it can be more it can be more expensive, can't it, on occasions, in terms of the time intensive, Kevin, in putting these things together.
If we're doing it, Tom's points are great. Absolutely right. If we're delivering a guided session online, you've got a trainer, but you've also got a second trainer monitoring the chat, monitoring the polls, monitoring the question, monitoring engagement. Something that trainers do on their own in a classroom. Online, you need 2 people, so it's actually more expensive from a resource perspective. And we've kept it really simple from a commercial angle. Whatever the course, if the qualification, the outcome is the same, leader-led or digitally, it's the same price to the consumer. It's their choice. Because if it's distance learning, you could argue that they're getting the benefit because they're not traveling, they're not downtime, they're not hotels. So the savings effectively are with them, not with us. So we've kept it really simple and kept the prices completely harmonious.
And Phil, when we talk about attitudes towards training, and we provide the training through the motor factors, which is where the relationship arguably is in between the garage and the motor factor. Are you seeing some changes in attitude there, in terms of where and something Kevin and Maria can get involved in as well, in terms of is it beneficial for every sector in the supply chain, every business, to be aware of what's coming in the future?
Without trying to be too critical of our motor factors, we've always found it difficult to get. I mean, we run, as we said, a host of courses are probably at about 50 to 60 venues across the UK, and they're running all the time. We do struggle with, I think, your average motor factor day to day. They've got their business to run, and they're selling, and their primary objective is selling parts. And I think he's trying to get that message across to the factor that it's not just, the margin you make off selling a course. It's keeping your key customers up to date, making sure that they've got the skill set to thrive and move forward and progress. It's getting that message across. I hate to keep going back to EV because it's not all about that, and I'm aware of that. But when you get the media talking about something and you get the legislation side of it as well moving forward, people do start to take a little bit more notice. And I think due to that, we're starting to get a little bit more engagement from our motor factors with regards to them wanting to offer that out. But certainly from an independent factor side, it is you'd be surprised how few of them offer training out to we go to their customers and we offer it to the customers, but very few will advertise, promote that, even though there are courses running in their local area that they could advertise out to their customer base.
Okay. We're going to move now to another poll, if we can, having listened to everything we've had so far from the panelists. A reminder to get your questions in as well, please. Please use the questions box to post your questions, and we have got some time at the end to run through. But if we just move to the poll now, the question is, from what you've heard, what are your training priorities for 2021? So if you just take a moment to select one of the following. So what are your training priorities for 2021? Some of the choices are diagnostics, EV and hybrid, ADAS, MOT testing, or something completely different. So if we just take a moment to answer those. Tom, what do you think will be the top training priority for 2021?
Well, it says at the bottom that we're not allowed to vote, so I don't know whether we should answer or.
I'm just testing to see if you're going to be correct with the audience that we've got. So my apologies.
The thing is, Mark, I think it's like all of the above, isn't it? Really, and as other panelists have been commenting as we've been going along, it's about having a business plan and kind of identifying where the need is. It's easy at the moment. Oh, we've got to do EV, we've got to do EV, and yes, we have. You know, we've got a 2030 date kind of looming and things like that. But it doesn't mean that everything else is going away. We still need diagnostics. We still need people to be doing the MOT tests, and we still need everything else. So it's a question of business, as Maria was saying earlier on. I think, you know, like, looking at the business and the business training aspects themselves, how to run the business is important. And also, you know, making a plan. Do we need to send everybody on a hybrid course just yet, or is it just one technician okay? Do we need everybody doing diagnostic skills, or do we need just one or two sort of specializing in that area? So I don't know the answer exactly, because I think the answer varies depending on different businesses.
We've been running EV. Sorry, Matt, I was just going to say, we've been running EV hybrid or some form of hybrid training for well over 10 years now, and all that time, even now, I'll still go into a customer that's been on the training, got to level 3 through ourselves, and yet there'll be no advertisement on the premises, within the reception area, on their social media channels, saying that we are now level 3 qualified or however qualified and that goes for, like you said, any specialist skill, not just EV. But so it goes back to when we were talking about the business training. You know, it's, you've got to, if you're going to do it, you've got to promote it to make the most out of it.
Well, you are on a topical subject there, because if I just run through the results in terms of what are your training priorities for 2021, 51% said EV and hybrid, 17% said diagnostics, 16% said ADAS, 12% other, and 3% MOT testing. So I guess, Kevin, that does obviously steer us towards, I think, something that Phil said in terms of it's in the news a lot, we can't escape it, EV and hybrid being the dominant. But as Tom says, we've got to open our eyes and be aware of other things within the business.
Look, there should have been an answer, all of the above, because that's what independent workshops, I mean, that's the skill and the challenge for independent workshops is that they cope with multiple brands, multiple systems, multiple technologies. It comes down to which ones do they want to work on and which ones do they want to be efficient and make the most money, because that's what it's about. That's why they're service vehicles. So I think it comes back to, sorry for repeating it, what's the business plan? You know, what's the strategy? Where does training and education fit in there? And then when you've got that business plan, as Phil's just alluded to, talk about it, you know, tell your customers. So I think, you know, we've not really touched on diagnostics in this session. We've talked about hybrid because of the, you know, because it's so topical. But if you think about diagnostics, the changes that have already happened and will continue to happen in terms of, secure data access, security gateways on vehicles, connected car, and you think about how many times a technician today connects to the EOBD port, you could argue that diagnostics is the biggest risk to a workshop today, because that's fundamental to every kind of job that they do, from a service to changing a wiper blades. In some cases, you've got to put it into park mode and service mode. So diagnostics is not going away. So there should always be an undercurrent of diagnostics training, electronics, electrical, the core skills. And then it's the specific silver bullet training that we described earlier, whether it's hybrid or ADAS or the new aircon gas, whatever it be, there's always a silver bullet to be addressed inside a workshop. So I think it goes back to have a plan for training. Don't just react, don't just use it as a sticking plaster. It's part of your fundamental business plan.
And I think we have James back. Hi, James.
Sorry about that. Hey, guys.
That's okay.
Digital training works fine, doesn't it, James? Every time. There's no
perfect. Never a problem.
We have lots of delivery drivers coming to our house as well, so I understand the pressures. James, I'm going to take you back, actually, if I can, and we will go forward. But just want to ask you before we lost you, what are the perceived obstacles towards on training, and how can these be overcome in the future? And following that, what does training look like for you in 2021? We've asked the question, we've asked the poll. 51% of people on the poll have put EV and hybrid as their priority.
Yes, it's very interesting then. So EV and hybrid being a priority, it's interesting if the guys have talked about the mix of vehicles that exist on the road today, that we're maybe preparing for the flood that will come soon. So we're finding a great uptake for EV and hybrid, and at various levels, because Kevin was talking earlier on about matching skill sets. Existing skill sets can be modified to cope with EV and hybrid. And there are some subtle differences. No internal combustion engine in an EV is a big issue, but it's adapting the skill set to meet the needs of EV and hybrid. If you look at market share, we're down in single figures still. Most of those cars still exist in the warranty period, so the service and maintenance is limited on an electric vehicle typically. So the demand in the workshop maybe for electric and hybrid is growing slowly. So whilst it's a focus, it probably may not be the most business sense focus, but it is a focus, and we have to have somebody trained to do that, and I would encourage that. Maybe ADAS and those type of systems now are fitted and have been fitted for up to 10 years on a lot of cars. Service maintenance and repair procedures that happen typically also have to have calibration post repair, and there seems to be a lot of unknowns really that exist within garages. Removing the front of the car for a cam belt job, which traditionally is almost all mechanical, now we have to recalibrate the ADAS system once we disturb the radar, and so really their immediate needs are forced by technology and traditional service operations. And so, the demand can be based on what we think the perceived need is and preparing for the future, but also tactically dealing with what's in the workshop today, to cope with those. But diagnosis, electrical fundamentals, fault finding, those things are all very key, key skills.
No, you're absolutely right. And my apologies, because I should have told you that diagnostics and ADAS were second and third.
Okay, good stuff. Diagnostics, again, diagnostics is a really interesting term. It's probably the most overused term that we hear, because what is it? Diagnostics is a very wide-ranging subject, and it can come to finding a problem in a wire that stops a bulb from functioning, to the car won't start and none of the lights turn on. And so the number of jobs in a workshop that are covered by diagnostics are vast, and also the skills that go to make diagnostics are huge. And it's more about the mindset and the application of typical tools that then are applied through training. So a multimeter is a fantastic diagnostic tool attached to a brain, and often you don't need to go much further than that. And we're often blinded by the fact you need a computer and you need to plug it in and you need to look at data. And our approaches come right back from that. Really, it's about fundamental core processes, decision making. It's understanding core functions. How does a sensor work? How does an actuator work? How do you test it? So there are multiple skills. So when we say diagnostic training, the question is a bit too big. What aspect of that do you need to focus on?
So can I jump in there? Sorry, Matt. I just want to add to what James has said.
Yeah.
as typically, I tend to agree with James what he says anyway. It's just easier. What technicians, you talk about diagnostics as a very generic term, and we do something now called experience-based repair, which based on symptoms, a quick set of data, we can point the technician into, well, based on what you've told me on that model of vehicle, it could be this fault. It could, based on thousands of diagnostic sessions across Bosch Car Service Network, our diagnostic users, we can share that. But the first thing we do is, before you change anything, before you swap the component out, test it. So, we can use all of this data to say, look, it could be this, and 70% of the time it is this. But before you go and replace a component, order it from Motor Factor and have the risk of returning it because it's not the right component, wasting everybody's time. Follow a very simple diagnostic and test procedure to, absolutely say, yeah, based on the data, that's what it is. So again, but that's a training, that's an approach to diagnostics, which I think exactly what you were referring to, James. Let's not be blinded by what the scan tool tells you.
Maria, this is obviously, this discussion has proven how optimistic we are about training and how much content there is and how we can all help each other. Are you optimistic about the future going forward with training, despite obviously some of the restrictions or some of the processes we might have to now go through?
Yeah, no, very optimistic, Mark. In fairness, like I say, we've certainly, our guys, our BDMs have been back on the road only a month at the beginning of March, and the feedback, obviously we do get reports from the guys for every garage visit that they've done, and the feedback, the demand has not changed at all, and in fact, in some cases increased as well. So absolutely optimistic in terms of, and as I say, every course that we've run so far in March has been full. We haven't had any cancellations or no shows, and like I say, it's looking pretty positive for for the rest of the calendar year as well, for the ones that we've sent out so far.
Fantastic, and long may that continue.
Absolutely.
We're going to stop the discussion there, but I'm just going to move on to questions because we have a number of questions in. First question: Does the panel have an opinion on official mandatory licensing scheme? Does the panel have an opinion on an official mandatory licensing scheme? Tom?
Yeah,
sorry.
Wow, there you go. I was going to volunteer anyway. Yes, I do have an opinion on this, and I think it's something that will never happen. We should not put too much effort into trying to do it either, because it's unbelievably complicated. If we think of MOT testing is licensed, yet there are still issues that happen out there around MOT testing. There's another way of looking at licensing, and that's whether it's sort of a by law licensing system, or it's a licensing system that we create kind of from the bottom. In other words, we ensure that we are fully trained and fully experienced and fully up to date through CPD and things like that, in order to be able to maintain the standards of repair and the safety aspects for ourselves and things like that. I just think an overall licensing system, often people tell me that if only we were licensed, everything was okay and we would be able to charge a lot more and everything would be great. I just think the task of actually doing it in our trade is impossible. What does it actually mean to be licensed? Does it mean to have a level 3 qualification in your area? Therefore, you must never ever touch anything outside of your area. How do you make sure you're staying up to date with what's going on, and so on? And also who monitors it, of course. Does a government inspector sort of pop round and check your license every now and then? Our trade is too wide and too varied. Is it just for technicians? Is body people, paint people, sales people, parts people? Does everybody have to be licensed? I think it's impossible. Let's do it ourselves. Let's get qualified from the bottom up, stay up to date, and build the quality of the trade in that way.
And Kevin, we have
an opinion.
And Kevin, we not a dissimilar point, but it's a statement, I guess, rather than a question that we've had from the audience, which is garages must train their own experts for their business. I cannot stress the need for more apprentices.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with Tom. I think we're too far down the road in our industry. 150 years, it's too complex to go back. Although I do support licensing, I think to start with Tom's point and then move to the apprenticeship and the new skills. I think technology will force a kind of licensing anyway. As we move, we talked about the Electricity at Work Act. We talked about all of these new technologies. If you want to access OE data, you're going to need to be registered and licensed and trained. So bit by bit, every element of the servicing, 360 degrees of what a workshop has to do, each individual element will probably become licensed or registered in order to deliver it. So that's happening all the time, and I think that will progress. So whilst we do support technician licensing and high standards, I think it's going to be impossible to do in the UK industry. And then to your second point, the skills gap is only going one way. It's getting bigger, and the bigger it gets, and the faster that vehicle technology continues to evolve, that gap's almost going to become unfixable. And that's unfortunate. I think the government policy and the words of music just don't match. They talk about apprenticeships, but the harsh reality is the funding of apprenticeships has reduced net by about 30% in the automotive industry. And that, passing that burden on to employers, whether they be big employers, medium or small, is not the right thing to do for our industry. So we're passionately, lobbying government and the skills agency to review that position, because all it means is we get fewer apprentices and the training that they actually receive is not of the right quality. So all of this work that we've discussed here in the last hour about existing businesses, in many cases successful businesses, continuing to learn and develop and meet the challenge of the future, we're not doomed, but it's going to be incredibly hard with the massive skills gap that we're creating at the entry level.
James, do you want anything to add on that?
Yes, I think whilst I think there's a question that has to be asked to the question is, what are you trying to achieve by licensing? So whilst I support really the accreditation method of being competent. So the way we're dealing with ADAS and EV and the service tech, master tech, diagnostic technician, that framework I think is what we as an industry need to adapt and adopt, rather than once you get the government dictating and edicts coming through licensing, I think you'll find there are unintended consequences that don't fit the need. We hear licensing is required to try and drive the standard up, where garages are coming under pressure from people doing it cheaper, maybe not quite so well. And I think that business need is addressed through proactive marketing and business-led initiatives, and we ought to take the technical initiatives through the standardization process through accreditation.
Thank you very much for your answers on those. Just one final question, if I can stretch the time. How have the panel managed to deal with training that incorporates a physical hands-on assessment in a virtual world? James, do you want to go that one first, or?
Yes, yes, certainly. Yeah. So hands-on assessments in a virtual world don't work. So we've been unable to carry out hands-on assessments. So where some of the accreditations, such as ADAS and EV, are requiring the physical presence of a technician in a work environment to carry out a job that he's formally assessed by an assessor, it's not been possible. So we've not being able to run any assessments, and of the pandemic, that's probably the biggest single impact, where skills training can be carried out digitally, where we have to do the assessments, that they've not been carried out for that reason. And so we're back today as our first day with ADAS assessments running here under full COVID protocols. So we're cleaning, we're maintaining social distancing, we face masks, all of the usual stuff. And that's the only way, once the lockdown is lifted, we can do it, but we have to really comply to the COVID safe protocols.
And Phil, your training starting to again follow those protocols, but begin very soon.
Yeah, we're already running our courses, and as Marie alluded to, we're booking up all the courses that we're offering. As is just really from our point of view, it's more dictated by the venues. Whether we use a mixture, some colleges, some private sort of venues. Particularly with the colleges, it's when they're ready to take us back in and allow third parties to book. But yeah, everything's back up and running. We're just waiting on a few of the colleges to allow us back in.
Okay, fantastic. Sadly, that means we've run out of time.
Mark, sorry.
But I want to. Oh,
Mark, can I have 30
sorry,
seconds?
Kevin.
Sorry, 30
Of course
seconds,
you can.
because we've got a slightly different experience. We had a customer who had a safety critical problem during lockdown, which was a reduced number of certificated hybrid technicians. So during lockdown, we were able to deliver the level 3 qualification on hybrid to 109 delegates, which then concluded with a half-day assessment in the training centre, obviously respecting all of the COVID restrictions. But because that was classed as business and safety critical, we got that approved through Bosch and with the customer. So it can be done, and of the 109, 108 passed first time, level 3. So it can
Fantastic.
be done. It wasn't difficult, and James is going through it, and Phil and Maria are going through it now. It is a change, but it's not impossible, so it can be delivered.
Fantastic, and thank you for adding that in. Sadly, this does bring us to the end of the webinar. I want to thank you all for joining us today. A special thanks to our panelists for giving up their time to share their views and experiences. It really was insightful, and I think we could talk for many more hours about training. And I think that the enthusiasm really does come through, and that's representative in our market at the moment. The recording of this webinar will be available on Auto Resource very soon, and be sure to check out the website, because that is a great platform for you to find and to kickstart your own training requirements. We will also email all attendees with details on how to access the webinar as soon as it's available. And once again, if you found today useful, if you found that we've added value, which is really important, please do let your other colleagues know, and also take a few moments to respond to our survey. The next webinar will return in June, and hopefully things will be a bit different again then, and more things will be open, hairdressers. And in the meantime, we wish you all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.